Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes and multiple ways you'd interact with us here on the program. Option 1, give us a ring, 201-939-4513. Option 2, hashtag Giants Chat on Twitter. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com.
You forgot option 3.
What is option 3?
That's wait for you outside and have a barbecue with them. An early tailgate for training camp.
Well, but that would be tough to pull off in the studio within the confines of the show, though. So, you're talking about extracurricular activities after the show. I'm focusing on the 60 minutes here, how we can actually interact with our audience. Yes, but Paul, will never lose out on an opportunity to expand the horizons here on Big Blue Kickoff.
I'm very lighthearted right now because the season hasn't started. Once the season starts, I get very intense.
No, I did not see that coming at all. I'm glad you clarified that.
I'm trying to have a lot more fun these days before we push the button.
And I'm trying to capitalize and take advantage of that, given the fact that I know this will be gone momentarily in terms of the tune that you'll be singing within this studio and then some. But we will continue our opponent preview series today. We're going to focus on the Las Vegas Raiders, so we'll have somebody that covers that team on a little bit later on in the program. But Paul, where I think it's appropriate to start is we are hearing some news outside of the building through reports, and I want to make this crystal clear. The Giants have not confirmed anything with respect to Jarrad Davis, but we did feel it would be appropriate for us at least to acknowledge the report. And the New York Daily News is saying that he will undergo knee surgery, and his timeline for a return right now is very much up in the air. And this was an individual, first of all, just in terms of background. Joe Shane goes out, he grabs him off the Lions practice squad late last year, and he proved to be an extremely valuable component of the middle of the defense. He was very active for the limited time that he contributed last season. We were talking about what Jarrad Davis was able to do on a game-by-game basis, and here was a player they re-signed, and the goal was him and Bobby Okereke would provide a 1-2 punch when, of course, Wink would choose to go with 2 linebackers. Now, we don't know. Wink's very creative. He uses a lot of defensive backs, so you can't assume he was going to have a conventional alignment at linebacker, but he certainly proved in a small period of time, Jarrad Davis, that he was warranted to come back in the mix here on the roster this season.
Yeah, he had double digits in tackles that 1 week.
Yeah.
Played a couple of games at the very end of the season. I think the one game he had 11 stops, if I'm not mistaken, and showed the Giants that, maybe he should not be labeled a bust as a former first-round pick who was a big-time prospect coming out of college. When he came out of, it was Florida, right? He was he was a stud. And, things with Detroit didn't work out so well. Had a pit stop with the Jets, went back to the Lions, and then he showed something to Wink. And Wink was like, all right, I think we need to explore this guy further. Now, with Darian Beavers coming off of the serious knee injury that cost him his rookie season, and by the way, I still have the highest of hopes for him. What a great, great camp he had last year until he got hurt in the preseason.
Yeah, against the Bengals.
So thinking that, you don't know exactly where he is medically yet and how fast and how hard can you push him, it would be advisable to have Davis back in the mix again. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore, at least according to the reports. McFadden drew some praise from Wink Martindale just a few weeks ago during the minicamp. Now,
unsolicited praise, by the way.
Correct.
That's important to note. He went out of his way.
He did.
When he was asked about who stood out to him.
Now, we know McFadden is an athletic backer who plays downhill. He's a vertical guy who's good on the blitz. He's got some quickness to him. But he's not the sturdy kind of linebacker that Davis is or that Beavers can be. He's just not the same type of guy.
Sure.
Sturdy-wise. Doesn't mean he can't play. Doesn't mean that Wink can't find a role for him. But you have to admit that this Davis story does put a dent in the depth chart a bit, because I think Davis would have been higher on the depth chart than either one of those guys, at least going into training camp.
Correct, exactly. Now, all things are up for grabs once we get into training camp and practices. It's possible guys move and so forth. But, also, what do we talk about every single year, Paul? You can't anticipate when injuries are going to hit you.
Never.
So even if, let's say, he didn't start immediately, you figure this could be a guy at some point in the season that would be reliable enough to fill in here or there. But the two guys you mentioned, golden opportunities now lie ahead for both Beavers and McFadden. McFadden showed some flashes last season, and Beavers, as you mentioned, is coming off the injury. And I think if you're one of those two players, as we approach the beginning of training camp, I think all of a sudden you say to yourself, okay, I've got an opportunity here, not just to prove that I belong on the 53-man roster, but that I could very well be one of the top two linebackers that Wink turns to on a game-by-game basis.
The other wild card here for me, and I don't know how seriously the Giants will look at this, but you remember when Carter Coughlin came here, he was an edge guy.
Yep.
And they worked him out at practice on the inside for several weeks. And then he got hurt and dinged up, and they kind of scrapped it. Well, I don't know. Is Carter Coughlin potentially, if they have depth issues during training camp, is he potentially a swing guy who they might work inside? I'd say that's a possibility.
You have Cam Brown, too, remember?
I don't see him as an inside guy, though.
Okay, no, that's fair. I know he did most of his work on the outside, but what I'm saying is those two guys went from being in the mix, though, at linebacker to all of a sudden being more special teams options, right, over the last few seasons.
Right.
We're talking about two members of the 2020 draft class, and McFadden and Beavers arrived and moved ahead of both of them. So it's possible now, yes, to answer your question, if Davis is out of the picture for a timeline that right now is very much up in the air, yeah, Coughlin could be that third guy that now re-enters the conversation.
Here's the wild card, and he maybe is the double wild card, if you will. Deontay Johnson out of Toledo.
One of the undrafted guys you're talking about.
He's an undrafted rookie free agent who the Giants apparently had a real eye for, and they brought him in. And who knows? Who knows? He is a complete and total wild card to me. But with the depth chart now in limbo and kind of smoky, well, you said opportunity a minute ago, right?
Sure.
Well, okay, Mr. Johnson, here's an opportunity to assert yourself and become part of the battle.
Troy Brown is another undrafted linebacker that's on the roster, too. I mean, we could sit here and go very deep into the unknown commodities that you were talking about. I think, though, it goes back to the numbers game. And if Wink tells Brian Dable and Joe Shane, I don't envision utilizing multiple linebacker sets very often. I think that's going to impact how many linebackers overall that they choose to keep. Specifically, it limits the internal options. So I guess what I'm getting at, Paul, is if we go down the hypothetical road, yes, and everyone's healthy, assuming, okay? Beavers, McFadden, Coughlin are all healthy as they finalize the 53-man roster. I would find it very hard to believe that a fourth interior option makes the roster.
I concur. I don't think there's much to talk about.
Correct. So until, God forbid, something happens to one of those three players that we're talking about, I think it's a very long shot for anybody else to carve out an opportunity here.
Well, to me, the biggest key for this entire equation, and it always has been, is how quickly will Darian Beavers be ready to go? Because if he's ready to go week one, well, look, with all due respect to what Davis did at the end of last season, if Beavers was ready to go week one, to me, I probably would put Davis behind him and let Beavers start against Dallas.
Well, he was in
opening
line
day.
last season before the injury.
That's my point.
To play a prominent
That's
role.
my point.
Yeah.
Davis, to me, in a perfect world, becomes the insurance policy for Beavers. But now your insurance policy's hurt.
Yeah. Well, but also the guy you're relying on, in fairness, is coming off a torn ACL and has not played one regular season NFL snap.
And that's why that's the biggest key to this whole thing right now.
Yeah.
Because if Beavers is not ready week one to start against Dallas, well, now either you change up your scheme or maybe you're looking at a Carter Coughlin or a Micah McFadden and saying, fellas, there's a spot here. You know, Beavers isn't ready. I mean, look, I don't want to speculate on Beavers because throughout the spring drills and the minicamp, he was with the trainers. He did not do a whole hell of a lot. He was being held back because they're being ultra conservative and they want to see what they can get out of him during training camp and the preseason. That's also not to say that we know, because we do not know if he's going to start training camp on PUP. We don't even know that.
Well, here's the encouraging news. We're going to be talking about a year removed from the injury by the time the season starts. And I think that's a good calendar to operate under, right, for an injury like a torn ACL.
Yes.
Now, everybody follows a different game plan.
Yes.
Nobody's exact, but normally we talk about it within a 12-month period, right? If you tore your ACL in July or August of the previous year, you feel good about the chances, right, of that player getting back in the mix. If the injury happens in the middle of the previous season, then it's more a little bit iffy. Would they be available to start in September?
You know the old saying, though, that the ACL recovery really takes 2 years before you can max out your return.
Sure.
So it's not just about Beavers being healthy enough to be cleared and to be able to play in an NFL game. You also need to know, what is his efficiency level going to be?
Absolutely. That's why it may be more of a volume numbers game this season opposite Bobby Okereke. You may pick a variety of guys. It may not be one guy in particular, is my point, that logs all the snaps. And here's the other thing. You have to take into consideration the opponents, Paul. Mm-hmm. 1 week, Wink will go heavy defensive
without
back,
a doubt.
Right?
Without
Another week, the Giants go up against a strong, run-minded team. Maybe he then goes the conventional route and he leans on more interior linebackers. So that's another reason why I think you have to take into consideration things are going to fluctuate, and the way the defense is structured 1 week is not necessarily an indication of what they're going to do the following week.
I can't sit here right now and tell you I know exactly how the Cowboys are going to attack the Giants in week 1. Tony Pollard is coming off a serious injury too. And if he does come back and sign the tag, which I think we believe he'll do.
Well, he already actually did sign the tag.
That's right.
He's the one guy that signed the tag already.
You're right. You're right. It's Jacobs who did not.
And Barkley.
Who did not.
Yep.
If Pollard is right in week 1, well, you'll assume Dallas will do a lot of running the ball. But if Pollard still doesn't look right to them, even though he'll play, they'll want to reduce his workload.
Well, and that's why there's a lot of guessing going on, especially in the early stages of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you're going up against a team that has continuity, you never know what they have up their sleeves. Because remember, Kellen Moore is no longer their offensive coordinator. It's now McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer. So they could go in the opposite end of the spectrum, or they could continue what they did last season. I think there's always a little bit of guessing involved with respect to that. But I was getting more to the point of, once we get into the heart of the season, the Giants, it will evolve week to week.
It will.
With respect to the structure of the defense.
Look, and these coordinators have made no secret about that. Basically, if you just listen to them, if not telling you directly, they're certainly dropping a lot of hints at you that this is going to be a matchup team on both sides of the ball.
Well, in fairness, though, it was like that when Patrick Graham was here, too. I mean, he would sometimes have a defense the following week. You'd be like, where'd this come from?
No doubt. Not as much as what these guys want.
No, that's fair, but
they take it to another level.
100%. But I do think we saw some hints of that even with Patrick Graham. And
we did, and we praised him for it.
Correct, exactly. Yeah, and coincidentally, we're going to be hearing about his new team, the Las Vegas Raiders, as he tries to revamp a defense that struggled immensely last season. But just to piggyback off of your point, Paul, you look at some of the opponents that the Giants will have in the early stage of the season. So, for example, they're going up against the San Francisco 49ers in week 3, Thursday night. Okay, we know the Niners like to run the football. That could be a game.
You think?
Yes, I know. I'm going out on a limb. But it's possible in that game, Wink actually relies more on 2 to 3 different linebackers.
He could.
And 2 guys could be on the field simultaneously. Then, Monday night, he's going up against the Seahawks, and we just previewed them earlier this week, and you've got DK Metcalf, and you've got Lockett, and you added Smith and Jigba. So, you look at all of these individuals, maybe they air it out a little bit more with Geno Smith the following week. Wink now turns to an extra defensive back, and it could come in the span of just one game.
Will you allow me to throw another meatball on your plate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm all ears.
All right. What about against a heavy run team? Wink decides he goes with 4 defensive linemen down on the front instead of the basic 3-4 with the 2 stand-up linebackers and a 5-man front. What if he suddenly decides, you know what? I'm going to pull little trickery out of my pocket. And this week, San Francisco, short week. You thought you were going to see a 3-4 with the edge rushers? I'm throwing a 4-3 at you this week. And all of a sudden, you got 4 guys. And now with the depth at defensive line, the Giants, with Anderson bulking up, with Nacho coming in, with Robinson being signed, all of a sudden the Giants could, if they wanted to, at any given time, play 4 defensive linemen.
Yeah. Well, and that would be a nice counter to the San Francisco running game, given how strong it is and some of the guys they have on the offensive line.
I throw that out to you now, months ahead of time.
Well, but all of this stuff that we're speculating about could be further an indication that, once again, while not trying to downplay this reported Jarrad Davis injury, but they may not be leaning heavily on linebackers to begin with. Bobby Okereke, the reason why they made an investment in him could be he's our guy, period. He's our every down, 3 down
he's the guy.
Anybody else around him is going to vary, but we're not necessarily going to rely on them from a play-to-play basis.
The thing about Okereke, when he was with the Colts, he not only played inside, but he played outside as well. So he's got the versatility where you are able to move him around to any of the linebacker spots, and he can handle it. That's why he's a 3-down linebacker, because you don't have to take him out in a substitution.
He could run sideline to sideline. He could play near the line of scrimmage. He could drop back in coverage. I think he's proven that during his time in the NFL. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're going to make an investment in a linebacker, right? We brought up the name Sean Lee and Luke Kuechly multiple times on this program. Lee with the Cowboys, Kuechly with the Panthers, because those guys are really good in coverage, in addition to what they brought in terms of the run defense. If you're going to invest in a linebacker once again, to me it's a must. He has to be, without question, a 3-down player. What's the purpose of investing in a guy, Paul, who you're going to take off the field every time there's a passing down?
Totally agree.
It's not worth it.
The beauty of what Okereke brings is, even as a, quote, inside guy, technically he is the middle linebacker in this defense, okay? Technically, that's the way they play it in the scheme. But he's the kind of guy who can actually blitz off the edge. You could show when he comes out of the huddle, he's going to be the guy in the middle. And there's the quarterback in the center identifying, he's the Mike, he's the Mike, he's the Mike. All of a sudden now, pre-snap, he's not the Mike anymore. Just before they snap the ball, all of a sudden, boom, he's looping around to the edge, and they're running a stunt with him, much like what the Cowboys do with Micah Parsons.
Yep.
Or had done. They're saying now he's going to primarily be on the edge. We'll see. But you can do a lot of stuff with Okereke because he's got the athleticism and the speed and the quickness and the experience of playing both outside and in. So he can absolutely do some of those things that an outside linebacker would usually do.
And that's why that combination of maybe going with a third safety, too, could limit the impact of another linebacker opposite Bobby Okereke. 201-939-4513 is the telephone number. A few reminders before we open up the lines, and then we will be breaking down the Raiders a little bit later on in the program. The Giants Huddle podcast, you can check that out on Giants.com/podcast, as well as your favorite podcast platforms. And as we look ahead to the start of the 2023 schedule, it's officially out. Single game tickets are on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. You can visit Giants.com/tickets to secure your seat, and you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app is Giants TV. It brings you original video content, game highlights, on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. All right, let's open up the lines at 201-939-4513. And we check in. Let's go with Cliff in New York here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Cliff? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. Thanks for the rundown on the defense. Very encouraging. I'm thinking that as far as the 3 units goes, I'm expecting to see the improvement most visible on specials and the second most improvement on defense. And I'm concerned about the offense still, even with all the additions, because I'm looking for a realistic appraisal of the offensive line. I know I got earlier in the week from Paul that we would have at least a middle-of-the-pack offensive line. So my first question is, do we have any kind of measurement from last season that we respect that tells us where the offensive line stood at the end of last season in the league?
Measurement in terms of what are you referring to?
Well, Paul had the offensive line as ranking in the middle of the pack coming into this season.
Well, that was Paul's estimation.
No, I'm
right?
saying that's where I think they will perform.
Yeah,
they will be a middle of the pack offensive line this year. That's what I believe.
And Is there any such measurement of where we were last year?
Well, it depends. If you want to go to those analytics services, there's a bunch of those folks who believe the Giants were in the bottom 5 or 6 in the league.
Ah, okay.
That was the point. That was the point I tried to make with that conversation, and that is, yes, I understand that they were disrespected heavily, but I also looked at that line last year and said, well, they did very well in the red zone, right? They did very well for the running game. They had a beaten-up rookie right tackle. They had a revolving door at left guard. They had, Feliciano was okay, but he was a stopgap at center. And they believe that all 3 of those positions will be significantly better this year. So that's the basis for why I'm telling you, take whatever ranking you want out there. I don't care what service you're talking to. I think this will be a middle-of-the-pack offensive line right now.
Yeah,
they may be better next year.
I didn't look at any of those services. I'm thinking about. There's a lot of reason to be optimistic about Evan, being the guy that we expect him to be, at least much more than he was last year because he was hurt mostly. And but in the middle, and we know we have a stud on the left side. But in the middle, it remains to be proven that we're improved from last year. Compared to the defense in the middle, I think there's a lot more optimism about being better in the middle in the defense.
Well, because you have more proven commodities. I mean, that's the biggest difference. A'Shawn Robinson and Nacho played in the NFL, so I don't think it's as much of a guessing game. John Michael Schmitz Jr., he has not played one NFL snap. And we could talk about how encouraging it is and all of the experience he had in college, but in fairness, until you see it on the NFL level, you can't take it for granted.
And don't forget, Robinson and Nacho have won in this league. Not just played in this league, but have won.
Well, but playing and logging all of those snaps and being integral pieces of their previous defenses, I think makes you feel good that they could come in and make immediate contributions. Elsewhere, when you haven't played and done it in the NFL level, it's fair to at least question it. And then as far as Ben Bredeson is concerned, Bredeson has been a fill-in type of guy before he came to the Giants. He's filled in with Big Blue here. I think he certainly is a veteran. It's not like this is his first go-around in the NFL, but is he going to be the main guy? Are they going to rotate at left guard? If it's Azudu, I think that brings in even more question marks because Azudu doesn't have a lot of more reps than some of these other guys. So, yeah, there's a possibility left guard and center. I mean, you could be looking at a combination of 2 players that are essentially rookies because Azudu, was limited due to the injury last season.
Absolutely. Well, I'm also thinking of something that I got from Schmelk a couple of years ago, either in the mailbag or on the air, that an NFL offensive lineman, give them 2 to 5 years to show what they can do in the league.
Sure.
Do you guys?
No, I think that's a very fair point, and we'll let you go on that note, Cliff. Appreciate the phone call. You could say that about most positions, Paul. Sometimes a wide receiver doesn't maybe spread his wings until year 3, too.
The rule of thumb has always been 3 years, okay? The rule of thumb. If you got a guy who breaks out as a rookie, boy, that is awesome. If he breaks out in his second year, you feel really, really good. But third year is like, okay, now it's time. If you don't show us something legit by your third year, there are now heavy questions going into your fourth year as to whether or not you have a future on the team. That's always been the way that GMs and coaches look at young players. So this, I mean, that's football 101. That theory has been around for a long time.
Well, also just look at Andrew Thomas. Andrew Thomas is coming off his best season. That was
and
year
it was his
3
third season
in the NFL. So,
correct.
I mean, you don't even have to go to external means. Just look internally, and I think you can prove that point with respect to the Giants and where the trajectory is with respect to the offensive line. You got a mix of youth, and you have a mix of encouraging pieces. And now it's a matter of that group all together, coming together, building that chemistry, and clicking. And I think whenever a guy is hurt the previous season and is able to come into this year and hopefully hold up, that to me is encouraging in itself. And we'll get to more phone calls as we move forward here on Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. But in the meantime, let's turn our attention back to our opponent preview series. Today we're going to focus on the Las Vegas Raiders as the Giants are going to visit Sin City in Week 9. They'll collide with Jimmy Garoppolo and the Raiders, as that team has moved on from Derek Carr, who's now going to be the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And to break down the Raiders, we bring in Vinny Bonsignore, who covers the team for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Vinny, you got Lance Medow, Paul Dottino here on Giants.com, Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Everything's going great. We're just a couple of weeks from the start of training camp. Everybody's trying to figure out, is Jimmy Garoppolo going to pass that physical and be ready to start training camp? So it's really the biggest question right now, because so much of the Raiders' season and success, frankly, hinges on Jimmy Garoppolo being healthy.
Oh, come on. You mean Brian Hoyer doesn't get the sauce bubbling on the stove for you?
And here's the thing. Just very surprisingly, Aiden O'Connell, the rookie quarterback from Purdue, decides to show up at minicamp wearing number 4, Derek Carr's jersey number. So that lit Raider Nation up a little bit. So who knows? Maybe you're going to see. Maybe number 4 is going to be back quarterback for the Raiders this year.
Well, you bring up a number of interesting points where I wanted to start, and we know when Jimmy's healthy, we saw what happened with the San Francisco 49ers. When he's not, obviously the team takes a hit. But I'm curious more about the backup position. Paul just brought up Brian Hoyer. What I'm wondering, Vinny, is why did they choose not to hold on to Jarrett Stidham? And I'm not saying that Jarrett Stidham is the best thing since Swiss cheese. Don't get me wrong. But in fairness, they had an opportunity to evaluate him in the final 2 games. He has history with McDaniel. I'm surprised that they went back to Hoyer as opposed to maybe sticking it out with a younger guy who ultimately the Denver Broncos brought in this offseason.
Yeah, I actually don't think it was really their decision. I think they would have been completely happy with him coming back as the backup quarterback. But at that point, kind of put yourself in Stidham's shoes. I think that he was looking at the Raiders coming off those last 2 games last year as an opportunity to really further himself as maybe the starter of the Raiders. And if you remember, the Jimmy signing and the Jarrett move to Denver kind of happened simultaneously. I want to say it was actually might have been the same exact day, right to start free agency. So I think in his mind, and Jarrett's mind is, look, I'll go be a backup someplace else, but I don't feel good about being the backup in Las Vegas after I kind of felt like I put myself in a position to be the starter. And at that point, once they brought Jimmy G in, there was no hope for that. So I think he decided to go elsewhere. I think the Raiders would have been okay with him being brought back as the backup.
Yeah, I'm a Stidham guy myself, too. I liked him coming out of Auburn a whole heck of a lot. Look, no matter who the quarterback is, he would love to know that Josh Jacobs is in his backfield. I think that goes without saying, Vincent. Your evaluation of the running backs room as it stands right now.
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of that could be also tied into Saquon Barkley, in the same exact situation that Barkley and the Giants are going through is what the Raiders and Josh Jacobs are going through. And when you tie that into just the NFL in general in terms of how the running back is viewed monetarily, it's certainly a different time from when we grew up. And I'll age myself a little bit, but I just remember days of Earl Campbell and Tony Dorsett and Eric Dickerson, and teams were literally built, Franco Harris literally built kind of around their running backs, right? And it just was a different brand of football and a different way of looking at things in roster construction. And now fast forward to 2023, and there's teams. Look at the Philadelphia Eagles. They were the best running team in the NFL. They had a 1,000-yard rusher who statistically didn't get as many carries as Josh Jacobs or maybe Saquon, but statistically had every bit as good a season as those players did in terms of the production for his team. And the Philadelphia Eagles said, okay, see you later. We're going to go bring in some cheaper players to replace you. So I don't know where this all stands. I don't think that they're going to come to terms on a long-term extension by the time July 17th rolls around, which is fastly approaching. And so then Josh Jacobs has the decision, do you sit out? I could see him sitting out training camp, but I don't see him sitting out any games during the regular season because that's going to cost him money that he's not going to be able to get back. In a fight that is unwinnable at that point. There's nothing that's going to be able to be changed by him sitting out next year or this season. The rule, there's nothing that you could do until next March anyway if they're not able to come to an agreement on July 17th.
Yeah, Vinny, I'm with you. I don't see him giving up $10 million in guaranteed money and pulling a Le'Veon Bell when Bell himself regrets it to this day. To piggyback off your point, though, about a little bit of the unknown behind Josh Jacobs, I know Zamir White, who was their fourth-round pick, got some opportunities when Jacobs was a little bit banged up and maybe left games here or there. How much do you think, regardless of Jacobs getting a contract done or not, that they limit his workload this season, given how much they utilized him last year, and they try to mix in some of these younger guys in a more balanced attack?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think I almost think that's needed for a couple of different reasons. Number one, can you really expect Josh Jacobs to hold up for a full season, mimicking or replicating that same exact kind of workload? I mean, that was really the first year that he stayed completely healthy through the course of the season in his entire career. So the chances of that happening, number one, are probably a little bit unlikely. But then also, so from the Raiders' perspective, you probably want to, help ensure that he gets through a season, is stronger at the end of games, and is stronger at the end of the season by decreasing his workload a little bit with a Zamir White and maybe a Britton Brown, who they also drafted last year. And then the other side of that is they probably have to prepare for life without Josh Jacobs at some point, which could be as early as next season. So it probably behooves them, I should say, to at least see what they have in Zamir White and Britton Brown, or at least get them in a position so that this time next year, if Josh Jacobs is no longer on the roster, they have two ready-made replacements for him that have some mileage now under their belt, and they feel good about moving forward with.
Vincent, bear with me. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here while we're talking about the Raiders' offense. I look at them overpaying for Jacoby Myers, the former Patriot, who they've now brought in. I just don't necessarily think this is a deadly passing attack as I see it right now, and yet they traded Darren Waller to the Giants a couple of months before the draft. And the Giants, of course, are thrilled to get a two-time 1,000-yard receiving tight end. So before you get to what you think of the targets that the Raiders will be using, could you give Giants fans your impressions as to what Waller will bring to the team this year, and if you believe that he's got a good chance of avoiding the injuries that have somewhat short-circuited him in the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you're getting a tremendous human being. There's nobody that I've learned so much just in talking to Darren Waller and hearing him talk about his journey. There's so much that I think Giant fans are in store for from a human standpoint. And then as a player, if he is able to stay healthy, which has been an issue the last couple of years, I want to say he's played 11 games or so the last couple of years. That was really the issue for the Raiders, in terms of what he was getting ready to get paid this year, coming into the extension that they had signed going into last year, and the availability, which just hasn't been there. That, and the fact that he's I want to say, I think he's 31 years old right now, getting ready to be 30. And so they felt like in Jacoby, who was 27, 28 years old, they traded some age for a younger player, and so that was kind of the rationale behind that. But in terms of what the Giants are getting from Darren Waller, if he's healthy, he's going to put up numbers. He's a fantastic football player. There were times covering him where he was literally unguardable. I mean, if you're going to put one player on him, good luck with that, because he's generally going to be faster than that defender, taller than that defender, can jump higher than that defender, knows how to use his body, to go up and get the ball. So there's a lot to like about Darren Waller. And frankly, just from a human standpoint, I'm definitely rooting for him to stay healthy and put up some numbers. And I think the Raiders would be okay with that, provided that they're going to get what they feel like they're going to get from a Jacoby Myers, who they believe is probably better suited as number two, playing opposite, arguably the best wide receiver in the game, and Devontae Adams, somebody that gets on the field and stays on the field, and with all the other weapons that they have, including a young tight end and Michael Mayer, I feel like it's going to look different for the Raiders' perspective and how it's presented, but they feel like they could be every bit as explosive as they've been in the past when Darren Waller was healthy.
Let me go back to Waller for just a second, because we know the Giants plan on using him all over the field. He can run the entire route tree. We know he can go deep. We know he can do the boundary stuff. He can do the seam stuff. He's a mismatch anywhere on the field. We get that. Andy Bischoff, the tight ends coach here, who had him in Baltimore when he first came into the league, has told everybody, don't sleep on him as a blocker. I know that that's not where he makes his money and makes his hay, but he is a capable blocker. As someone who's watched him now play in and play out for a while, what is your assessment about his blocking abilities? Again, not that they're going to use him a ton in that avenue of the game.
Yeah, I can remember having a conversation with Darren about his blocking. There was one particular play that he kind of walked me through. He made the key block, and it was kind of downfield, if I remember correctly. And so as we're talking, he goes, Vinny, you do realize where I played college football, right? At Georgia Tech. He wasn't catching a whole lot of balls at Georgia Tech. That was when they were in their run game.
He was a receiver there, though, Vinny. Remember that. He was a receiver at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, but as he told me, he goes, that's really all we did was block, because of the offensive system. So not only is he a capable blocker, but he takes a lot of pride in his blocking, and it's something that he understands that you have to do at this level, and you have to do it well, and that's how you stay on the field, and that's how you earn your catches too, by being able to do other things besides just catch the football. So and when he's in line at tight end and he's being a capable blocker, it also then allows him to be the fake blocker, then go out in the pattern. As a target, because you're thinking of him as a blocker, as a defender. So there's a lot of different ways that can play into his benefit and the Giants' benefit. But absolutely, he doesn't look it, because you look at him. He is tall enough and he's a big dude. But when you think of Darren Waller, you probably really think of him as a downfield threat, or just get the ball in his hands, let him do his thing. But he could certainly block without question.
We are talking with Vinny Bonsignore, who covers the Raiders for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. I want to expand off of your point earlier where you said the Raiders could have a very different look this year because Waller's no longer in the picture. I think even before Davante Adams showed up, Vinny, it was fair to say Waller was their number one guy, with Hunter Renfrow maybe being a complimentary piece. So now that you've got Adams, you got Myers, you got Renfrow, and you brought up Michael Mayer. They also went out and got Austin Hooper, who was very productive for Tennessee, especially as a red zone threat. And people forget O.J. Howard is on this roster too. How does the targets, you think, balance out between the receivers and the tight ends? Is it more of a balanced attack, or is it Davante Adams and friends still in your mind?
No, I think it almost has to be a more balanced attack. And remember, I think Davante had about 182 targets last year. He only had, he had 100 catches at 182 targets. That was the most targets that he's ever had in his career. But if you look at it, the disparity between the catches and the amount of targets, somewhere along the line, something wasn't adding up, because that's 82 misses that you're talking about.
Sure.
So, and part of that was because Darren wasn't out there, and also neither was Hunter Renfrow, for that matter. He suffered a concussion in the second game of the season that knocked him out. Basically, he was never really the same coming back from that injury, and then on top of that, he suffered another injury. So, by necessity, Davante Adams had to be the main target. Now, if Jacoby Myers is healthy, if Michael Mayer is healthy, Hunter Renfrow is back, there's other ways to go with the football. And I think that's what the Raiders want to do. And you look at their offense; they were 12th in the league last year in scoring points, which looks really good until you factor in that at somewhere along the line in October they were the third highest scoring offense in the NFL. Getting to 12th was a fall off over the last couple of months of the season,
right.
And that's really what precipitated some of these changes, including Derek Carr, who just played terrible over that 2-month period, and in particular, like his last 5 games were just bad football. So 12th looks good on paper, but not so good when you consider that they were top 10, top 5 going into November.
Let's go to the defense. We know what Max Crosby is. A lot of people have reason to love what that guy does on the field. But Chandler Jones on the other side, how much gas does he have left in his tank? They drafted Tyree Wilson in the first round. But if Max Crosby doesn't get help with the pass rush, I'm kind of worried about where their defensive front is going to get the production from.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, the good news is Chandler was playing his best football in the 4 weeks leading up to his injury. He sat out the last 2 games of the season. The bad news is, well, where was that, the first 12 weeks of the season or so? So they need to figure out a way to get more production from him in terms of being a pass rusher earlier in the season. Now they went out and got Tyree Wilson, who they feel can play in conjunction with Chandler, sometimes as a replacement for Chandler. But I think as the season goes on, you're going to start seeing Tyree Wilson, Chandler Jones, and Max Crosby on the field at the same time, which the Raiders hope creates kind of a three-headed pass rush monster that does what they haven't been able to do here for a long, long time, and that's get consistent pressure on the quarterback, because then that leads to the other issue that they've had, because they haven't had that kind of pressure. Then on the back end, their secondary has been exposed. They haven't been able to create enough turnovers. They're always in the bottom of the league with that. So they feel by upgrading the pass rush, and that includes Chandler being better from the start of the season, then they can help all levels of their defense. But they definitely need Chandler Jones to be closer to the Chandler Jones that they thought they were getting when they signed him last year, and they certainly need Tyree Wilson to hit as a rookie.
Well, Vinny, they could always use Chandler Jones as a receiver now that Jacoby Myers is on the team. They hooked up very nicely last season and handed the Raiders a victory thanks to Myers' contributions as a special teamer. So maybe they can experiment in that department.
Yeah, no about it. And I even on that day, which that was a shocking play, by the way. I've seen a lot. That one was pretty crazy. To me, the person with that was the least culpable was Jacoby, because you put yourself in his shoes. The play's in front of him. The clock's running out. All that needs to happen is, the guy goes, either he scores or he goes down, and we're going into overtime.
Yep.
He was the most surprised person in the whole stadium. He's looking happen, and now he's trying to decide, well, what am I supposed to do now? And then he did the thing that you should have never done, which is throw it back to the quarterback. And by the way, if you look at Chandler on that play, we're taking a little trip down memory lane.
Yes.
But he was literally laying down in the middle of the field, thinking that the play. The only reason he was where he was he gave up on the whole thing. He thinks the game's over. It's not coming back this way. So he's like taking a nap almost on the field, and then realizes what was going on and sprung up just at the right time to be able to make the interception. I guess it's considered an interception, right? And then
sure.
And then sprung off Max. The young goes to the turf and then run for a touchdown, which. The craziest play, but I still to this day feel sorry for Jacoby Myers.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why, to Paul's point, maybe they gave him a few more pennies in the contract as a result of him giving an assistant. So, it all adds up. You rub my back, I rub your back. See, this is the reminiscing segment. We're talking about Darren Waller. We're talking about Chandler Jones. We're taking Vinny down memory lane. But to bring this conversation back to planet Earth, Vinny, you brought up the point about they're hoping an improved pass rush helps out the secondary. And they did bring in some new cornerbacks, specifically Duke Shelley and David Long Jr., some veterans that have been around the league, and Marcus Epps at safety. Does the personnel, though, in your mind, match an improved level of play? Because I feel like, Vinny, we've had these conversations year in and year out. This is going to be the year the Raiders secondary turns the corner, and you who have covered the team for many years, it's all of a sudden deja vu all over again.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about. I feel like the guys that you just mentioned, and throw Jacorian Bennett in there, the rookie that they drafted from Maryland, who looked good in OTAs and minicamp. I think he's going to get a legit shot. And who knows, Marcus Peters is still on their radar, so he may get thrown into the mix at some point. But in reality, as important as those players are, and maybe even including Peters, the guys that really need to get back on track are Nate Hobbs, going into his third year, Trayvon Merritt going into his third year, the young safety from TCU, and then Dugai Diablo, their linebacker. All three of those players, I went back and counted. Trayvon Merritt going into last season was going into his fourth new defense in 4 straight years. When you go back to his junior year at TCU, his senior year at TCU was a new defensive coordinator, and obviously his rookie year with the Raiders, and then his second year with the Raiders. 4 different coordinators from junior year to second year in the NFL. Ryan Diablo and Nate Hobbs all were going into year 3 with a third different defense that they were learning. And, oh, by the way, all 3 of those players got hurt last year early on. That kind of stunted their growth and kind of knocked them off path. If those 3 players, and they've played enough good football for you to think that, they've got the talent. Are they going to get settled down now going into year 2 in Patrick Graham's defense? And if they can stay healthy, are they going to be able to take big steps forward? Because for me, for the Raiders defense, we've talked about Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, and that all needs to happen. Tyree Wilson needs to have a good year. The players that they brought in, including Marcus Epps, need to help solidify things. But if those 3 players can get back on the right track and take big steps forward, to me it changes the whole dynamic of what we're talking about in the Raiders defense. And then even if the Raiders just improve marginally, get to 19-20 in the NFL rather than in the low 20s or for far too long 31st or 32nd in the league and giving up points. If they could get it into the 20s, 19-20, it makes all the difference in the world, because you have to presume, and this is the big if, which we have to get to at some point, I'm sure, is if Jimmy G stays healthy. It's all predicated on that. But if he does stay healthy, there's enough offensively with Josh and everyone else that we've talked about for them to score points. But can they make enough stops for them to win some of those close games that they lost last year and maybe legitimately put themselves in a position not to win the division, that's the Kansas City Chiefs, but maybe make a push for a wild card spot, kind of like the Seattle Seahawks did last year. The Giants did the same thing last year as well, where you're not looking at any of those teams maybe as Super Bowl contenders, but can they win enough of the close games that they lost last year to make a little bit of a push? And part of that's going to hugely be on the defensive side of the football.
Well, clearly, based on what you said, Vinny, and my final question is this: how much is Patrick Graham then on the hot seat? We remember him here with the Giants. We praised him for the way he emphasized versatility and used to try to confuse opposing offenses. But he went out to Vegas, and last year his defense didn't hold up its end of the bargain, and it sounds like you're saying basically they've got to do it this year if they're going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And there was some argument, or some talk amongst fans. Well, is this defense too complicated for the players? And maybe it was. And you need to dummy it down. You need to make it more simplified, which the Raiders did. But talking to people with the Raiders and the more you dummy it down, the easier you're making it for the opposing team.
Yes.
This is the literally. And I had many conversations with Raiders people about this. Like, to win championships, you're going to have to be able to do complicated things defensively, and you're going to have players that can adapt to that pretty quickly. Sometimes on a week-to-week basis. When you get to the playoffs, you can't be doing the same exact thing you've been doing all along, or maybe even the past week. You have to change on the fly, and you need smart players, intelligent players that are going to be able to grasp that. So they got sick and tired of hearing the old dummy it down, make it more simple, because they understood, yeah, you might be making it more simple for your own players, but it just makes it easier for the opponents. They want to get smarter players into the building, and they probably figured that out about a month or so into the season, that they needed to make some major upgrades defensively. Now, it's not going to happen overnight because there's only so much money you can spend in free agency and so many capable players that are available in free agency.
Right.
Their thought process is you have to draft and develop it. You have to get it from that perspective and that point of time. And that's going to take a couple of years. But certainly, to your point, they need to make some step forward in the right direction. Is Patrick Graham on the hot seat? I can't sit, based on what it was. I think the decision makers understood where the problem really was, and it wasn't Patrick. It was the talent that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So many misses in the draft over the years, and players that frankly just weren't capable intellectually of carrying out what he wanted to do.
We've seen that before, Vincent. We've seen that before, so that's not a one-time situation, just so you know.
Sure. Well, a number of members of that Josh Jacobs draft class that you don't give second contracts to, sure, obviously it puts you in a very precarious spot. Vinny, before we let you go, I want to bring this conversation full circle, and you were talking about Jimmy's health, and that's obviously the million-dollar question. Nobody has a crystal ball. But how much do you think whether or not Jimmy could hold up is actually dependent on what the offensive line does in pass protection. I know they're very good at run blocking, and it seems like the same unit is coming back from last season. So I think that bodes well for their ground game. But as you well know, Jimmy's not the most mobile guy who maybe like Derek Carr can extend plays a little bit. What are the dynamics like in terms of pass protection this year out of that group as they look to regroup in that area?
Yeah, and they did a pretty decent job in terms of giving Derek time last year. So they feel like even at worst, if they replicate what they did last year, it should be good enough for Jimmy G. And you look at Jimmy's injuries, and so many of them are on whether he's trying to extend a play or bad luck.
Yep.
I don't know how much you could always put it on his offensive line in San Francisco. It's just that he's had really bad luck with injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you jurisdict that. You know what I'm saying? Like is it just who he is and what his what he's going to be known for as a professional football player, that invariably or inevitably he's always going to get hurt. So but yeah, I mean, it is important, especially with him, to make sure they do everything that they possibly can from an offensive line standpoint to make sure that the quarterback stays upright. Because really, when we get right down to it, him staying healthy or not is going to play hugely into the season. Because I don't think there's a lot of confidence that Brian Hoyer is going to be able to step in and save the day. In fact, I think he's really here to help Aiden O'Connell be the guy if Jimmy G somehow gets goes down at some point in the season. I think the preference would be that by that point, whenever that might happen, if it does, is that Aiden O'Connell is ready to go, to be the replacement. And part of that is Brian Hoyer doing his job in that quarterback room to help groom Aiden O'Connell. So it's kind of interesting that the backup quarterback, the likelihood or the preference is that the backup quarterback right now doesn't ever play. Hopefully the starting quarterback stays healthy. But even if the starting quarterback gets...
No, and that makes sense. He's essentially an extension of the coaching staff because he knows the system being with McDaniels in New England. It adds up very well based on what you're saying. They, though, hope that they don't have to revisit that, and Jimmy Garoppolo puts together one of his 16, 17 games played scenarios, which we've seen. It's just we have not seen it very often. He is Vinny Bonsignore. He covers the Raiders for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Vinny, always great catching up with you. Greatly appreciate the time and the insight, and we look forward to talking down the road.
Thanks, Vinny.
All right. See you guys in Vegas.
Sounds good. That is Vinny Bonsignore breaking down what to expect out of this Las Vegas team, a team that the Giants obviously do not see on a consistent basis. But new look this year with Jimmy Garoppolo, a lot of new pieces on offense outside of Devontae Adams, and they're hoping that, I think based on what Vinny was talking about, they're hoping, and we saw that here with the Giants, that Patrick Graham now has the personnel to do and run what he wants to carry out. And I think based on the changes they made, you can't say it's the lack of effort. Right? The personnel has changed. Now it's a matter of putting them in the right spots and seeing if they can capitalize.
They'll play the Giants out in Vegas on November 5th, week 9 of the NFL season. So by then, Patrick Graham should have everything smoothed out if those players are capable of running his system. The question will remain, will Jimmy G be in the lineup by week 9?
Well, I wasn't going to ask him that question because you never hope for somebody
No, you
to
don't.
get hurt. But yes, we don't know. We have no idea.
And I'm a Jimmy G fan. Let me make that very clear, guys.
So
I thought the Jets would have been so much better off with either Carr or Jimmy G over Rodgers, especially with Rodgers being almost 40 years old. But whatever.
Well, I love the move for the Raiders, bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo. But as I said at the time, and I stand by this, Jimmy Garoppolo is a great investment, but your backup quarterback is even that much more important when you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. And as we were talking with Vinny, I mean, that's why I asked about Jarrett Stidham, who I thought would have been more reasonable to hold on to.
I do.
Brian Hoyer, I think to his point, he's a great coach to have in the room, right? Who better to help Jimmy learn the offense and Aiden O'Connell? But if they have to go to O'Connell and O'Connell doesn't play one snap by the time you get into the middle of the season, and the Raiders are in a standings position where they're knocking on the door.
That's
a
lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's not a great situation to be in. So I like Jimmy Garoppolo, but your backup quarterback becomes that much more important. You would love to have Tyrod Taylor if Jimmy Garoppolo's your starter.
A lot of teams would like Tyrod Taylor.
But that to me would be the ideal backup. Jimmy G's your starter. Tyrod comes in, God forbid Jimmy gets banged up. It's that type of assignment. Or an Andy Dalton to back up Jimmy Garoppolo.
Mitch Trubisky.
One of those guys, correct. You want to feel you're secure with one of those veterans. But we could sit here and talk all we want about the Raiders quarterback situation. Something tells me Giants fans are not losing sleep over that. Before we wrap up shop, let's try to squeeze in a few more phone calls here at 201-939-4513. Hugo is in New Jersey. He joins us here on BBKL. What's happening, Hugo? What do you got for us?
Hey, good afternoon, guys.
Hi.
I wanted to confirm a couple logistic matters. First, my understanding is that the rookies will come in earlier than the veterans. They'll be coming in next week. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the standard for across the league.
Right.
Okay. Is there going to be media availability?
No.
And
No.
What's the agenda like for the rookies? Is it just classroom and walkthroughs, or
Right.
Is there? That's it. Okay. Fair enough. So not a very eventful next week.
No.
No.
Yeah, I would
No.
not. And even if they met with the media, which they're not, they're only going to be able to weigh in on so much, having been in the classroom and maybe eating a few meals at the facility. There's not going to be a lot of insight that's going to be brought to the table.
Well, maybe lunchroom reviews.
Well, if you find that insightful, then maybe that's insightful.
The salad is always fresh.
Okay. Well, you could have provided
Wow.
that update. We didn't need the rookies to do that. Yes.
Yeah, we've had such a long break here. I guess I'm looking for some breadcrumbs.
Oh, well, I was going to
Whatever.
breadcrumbs. I mean, what's even a little bit lower than breadcrumbs? I would put that.
You'll have some news on July 17th. Don't worry about it, okay?
Okay. My next question is, do you guys know if another Giants Life episode is in the works?
Yeah.
Bridge the gap.
Well, to bridge the gap, no, you'll have a new one during training camp. Once training camp comes and they get more content to document on film, we will have a new episode.
Okay, so there's
Yes.
not one covering between the draft and the termination of the off-season program. It's start of training camp is sort of
Yeah, it'll be. I mean, there's a lot more content to work with during training camp. You could follow guys around, see what they do locally. So you'll get at least 2 episodes during the course of training camp. That's normally what has been the schedule.
Okay.
Yeah, this
Well,
seems
very
to be.
good.
This is a
Appreciate
phone
it.
call about content. That's what that phone call was all about. Hugo.
It's okay.
And that's all good. Appreciate the phone call. Hugo, he's foaming at the mouth, man. He wants more stuff.
Nothing wrong with that.
You got to elevate your role here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We're getting your A- game. I expect a little bit A+ game. That's what Hugo's telling you here. He wants more content. Okay, come on, Paul. Let's go.
I mean,
You know?
this is the black hole in the NFL schedule.
Well,
We
how
all
appropriate.
realize
By the way,
that.
we were just previewing the Raiders, and you referenced the black
Yes,
hole.
exactly.
It's
You
very
caught
nice.
that. I'm impressed.
Nothing gets over my head. Yes.
Well, I'm not going to go there.
Don't comment. Yes, that was a layup for you.
Yes, it
Please.
was, and I just decided
Good.
to let you off the
let,
hook.
let that fastball go to the
Yes,
side. Okay.
Howard Cross would not have.
No, that's a strike down the middle. Okay. Yes, we digress. Back to the topic at hand. Did you want to add something? Okay.
No, I think we can go to the next call.
Beautiful. Phil is in North Carolina. He
We
takes
got time
us
for one more.
The rest of the way. What's happening, Phil?
Hey, guys. Hey, Lance, pretty funny, as always. Thanks a lot, guys. Excellent job. I'll try and make it quick.
Sure.
I would think that 2 things I got. First thing is I would think that with the unfortunate injury for Davis,
Yeah.
it may open up the window a little bit more for Landon Collins. I guess he played a kind of a joker role.
Yeah, but that's not
year.
what Davis is. Davis is a sturdy inside backer, and Collins is more of that wild card guy, as you say, a joker type. They're not the same kind of guys. So I don't think this has any impact on Landon Collins at all.
Yeah, that's a good point, Paul. I guess I was thinking in terms of purely numbers game in the interior. But yeah, I mean, I guess if they wanted to strictly adhere to, Davis's role, they try to get another thumper out there. Second thing is something I've been thinking about, and I'm always cognizant. I don't know if you guys ever read Greatest Generation by Tom Brokaw, and what it really makes me think about is like the importance of getting these stories documented from our vets, and the same could be told about old Giants. Like last week I kind of searched on like if there was any stories about Giants who played in the 40s, 50s, 60s, And, boy, there may not be any more 40 players in the 40s, and the importance of getting their story documented. And I was wondering, like, maybe you guys can do another, like, Giants Life that centers on old former Giants.
Well, Giants Chronicles has been around for a long time, and again, you're within the MSG market area, aren't you?
No, but I was for years.
Yeah, but those are online. I believe some of those are accessible
a lot of them
online.
are. I don't know how many of them, but a lot of them are. And so Chronicles has been an award-winning series that's gone on for a lot of years, and that show specializes in documenting Giants of the past. I mean, I don't know that you could do a much more thorough job than a half-hour program on a particular player.
No, it's true, but I didn't think they really went into, like, the old, like, pre-50s, if there are any left.
There's also not a lot of video.
Unfortunately, and also some of those guys, unfortunately, are no longer with us, too.
Some?
Yeah. Well,
most.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Here's what I will say to you. And a lot of folks kind of dub me the unofficial Giants historian around these parts. I will say this. I always say myself, I concentrate my focus of Giants history on the beginning of the modern era of football, which you can now, honestly, there are two things you can do with that. 1970, the merger of the AFL and the NFL, which became NFC, AFC. You can make that a line of delineation, or if you choose, you can go back to the greatest game ever played, the 58 playoff game, the championship game, where the Colts beat the Giants at Yankee Stadium in overtime. You can use either one of those lines of delineation and say, okay, that's where modern football really took hold. I think the Colts-Giants game is really the one, but as we've moved on here, and I've covered the team for 41 years, I've basically kind of moved up the line to the 1970s because 1970 was the merger. And unfortunately, a lot of the older folks, some of them aren't around, and as we have new groups of younger generations of fans, for me to stress a lot of my 50s and 60s stuff goes over their heads. At least 1970, that's over their heads too, but maybe not as far over their heads. Because you get that whole thing about pre-ESPN. A lot of people just shrug their shoulders and say, like, oh, whatever. It may be shallow, it may be foolish and naive, but a lot of people feel that way. If it was pre-ESPN, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could say that about other sports too. And Phil, appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring. I think people look at the NBA the same way. I mean, look at the Celtics teams from the 50s and the 60s.
No doubt.
Do you think kids of today's generation know even the impact of Bill Russell and Bob Cousy?
I'm sure they don't.
So, I mean, I would say
I have reverence for the history of the game. I love nostalgia and I love tradition. So I have reverence for that stuff. I hold it in extremely high regard. And so, for me, I personally, for me, it really starts with the 58 championship game. That's where my real Giants expertise begins. And, I don't think a lot of young people necessarily want to take the time to go back and research that stuff or gain that kind of knowledge. I just don't.
No, I'm completely
This
with
is
you.
a TikTok generation, right?
It's a lack of patience generation is what I would say. But you can learn from history, and I think some of the greats can provide some insight too. So, listen, whenever there's the opportunity for us to bring them on this program specifically, we won't shy away from that. But I don't know necessarily if that will become a regular occurrence, just to respond to the caller's point.
How many people do you think today, young folks, even know who Pat Summerall is?
Well, there's another
And if they know he was the voice of the NFL, how many of them know he actually played the game?
I don't think they look at him as a broadcaster.
And was a legendary Giant.
Yeah, well, think about how many people know that John Madden was a head coach.
I know.
There's generations that think he was just a broadcaster.
No, there are generations that think he's only a video game, too.
Well, that could be the case, too. But I do think most of the video game crossover comes with coaching.
I knew we were in for a problem with the next generation when young folks really thought that Joe DiMaggio was nothing more than Mr. Coffee. I knew then when he was doing those commercials that we were in for a real problem with the younger generation.
Well, I think you just summed up how it's a across the board of sports. It's not just necessarily football.
Yeah.
We're bringing in basketball and baseball examples too. So we will leave it at that. Certainly appreciate everybody tuning in to Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We'll be up and running again on Thursday as our opponent preview series will continue with the Patriots, and then Friday we'll turn our attention to the Green Bay Packers. Today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you here on BBKL on Thursday. Have a good one.